There we Yay. No, this is what happens when you all boo me. So 2 weeks ago, I got booed, and Jay was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to go on vacation. Here, you can have the stage. I was like, oh, thanks. I think I got booed, and I was sitting in the back, so be easy on me today. A couple things I was just thinking before I get started. I don't think you as the church realize how blessed we are to have the worship team that we have. Amen. And so would you all, they do an amazing job for as young as we are as a church, as small as we are, to have the talent that we have on this stage is truly God's blessing. And I was thinking, they never get booed either, yeah, they do a really good job. And then how blessed we are that Pastor Jay answered the calling. I've been with him for over 10 years, serving in ministry together. And we've had a lot of conversations back and forth, and it has always been a struggle of when and what and as God leads us. And, it's not by mistake that we're here right now. It's not, that God has something planned. There are things happening. There are things happening every day that even as the church you don't know about. And it's just crazy. It scrambles our brain. We're trying to keep up. And so we're just excited that we get to be a part of what God's plan is and what journey is, and we're excited that you guys get to go along with us. I tell people all the time, there'll be a day that you'll get to sit in the audience and say, hey, I was there when it was just an office building. And everybody else won't know, hey, what happened, how crazy God worked in those times. So I thought today what I would do is I would share a little bit of my testimony. I'm the guy that supports Jay. What I've been called to do and my job that God has put upon me is to basically support Jay in everything that he does. And so I'm the guy that kind of behind the scenes makes sure everything keeps working. And what that does is that allows our pastor to really focus on ministry and focus on what God's called him to do. And my job is to make sure that the ship keeps going in the direction, the vision that God's given him. And so a lot of times people don't see me, don't know what's happening, but that's what my role is here at the church. And I'm honored that I get to do that and get to be a part of that. But for me as a kid, and where I was born and raised in Southern California, I lived in Orange and Big Bear. And I was raised in a very Christian home, very strong home. Learned a lot about working at a very young age. When I was 5 years old, my grandpa would pay me a nickel a 2x4 to slide 2x4s onto the footing and onto the foundation so his guys could frame. So I lived in a family that we were construction, built homes, built stuff. And from a very young age, I was taught to work. In the late 70s, early 80s, in that space, the oil crunch happened, the work disappeared in California, and there was no way to support families. So my dad packed our entire family up in a 1955 Chevy pickup and a 1971 Malibu and drove to Missouri because he was there one time when he was 18. He had no other idea what to do, so he packed. I vividly remember driving through Death Valley. My dad's truck had the side pipes on it, and he would have me look out the window to tell him how far the sparks were coming out of the side pipes. But he was afraid to stop because he was afraid the engine would seize up. And so he drove all the way, never stopped. That truck actually ran for 3 years after we got, and then one day the motor did lock up. But, as a kid, I always learned how to adapt, how to overcome. It was just something that my parents did. There was never an excuse. There was never a reason. But they never really they kind of hid from us the struggles of life. One of the things that I didn't realize till I was older, that when we got there, my parents had no money and no food. But my dad did odd jobs to pay, but I never realized that we ate oatmeal for an entire week. Well, what that was we had food and it was provided. The provision was there, but it wasn't what we expected. But as for my mom and dad, I never thought of that as a bad time. And then, my dad found more jobs and got stuff rolling, and so our family was taken care of. But one of the things inside of that was I had 2 baby sisters, and there was a garment factory one town over, and my dad cleaned that garment factory at night. Anybody remember Lee jeans? They were actually made in Missouri for a long time. My dad would pick me up when I was about 12 years old from school at 3:30, and we would clean that factory from 3:30 to 2:30 in the morning. I would come home. I didn't know this till later. My mom would tell stories. I would come home, and she would clean all the blue denim dust off my face and clean me up and get me ready. I would go to school the next day. But it was how our family was fed because my mom couldn't go work a job. It was just a different time. We had 2 children. There probably wasn't daycare back then. And so I don't really remember the span of how long that was, but I remember that was a big, important piece of my life of always about overcoming, always finding a way. There's always an answer. There's always something. Um, you know, and then we ended up moving to Oklahoma through my dad's continuing work. My family got very blessed financially. Things went really well. I didn't go to college because I didn't need to go to college because my dad had a really great business, and I worked in another division of his business. So I never went to college. Unfortunately, how the world turns, when I was 19, my parents lost their entire business within 3 months. And so once again, I was sitting in a space where I was like, I didn't go to college. I made a choice at 19, I got married. For me, I know for a lot of people, they get married. At 19, I was not mature enough to make that decision and to do that. Through that marriage, I had 2 wonderful boys. I have 2 older boys. But unfortunately, within about 13 years, it led to divorce. And so I was sitting at a point in my life where I had, at 19, walked away from God. And what's an interesting thing about this story was when I was 15, I was called into ministry. If the building still existed today in Oklahoma City, I could take you to that spot and stand you in that space and say, this is where God called me into ministry. For me personally, God speaks to me audibly, not all the time. But there, even in this ministry and the ministry I have, is I hear God's voice, and he will say, this is what you need to do. And so for me, for that moment when at that age, I knew that I was going to go into ministry. But unfortunately, through choices that I made, I walked away. And it was also part of the environment that I was raised in, how I was raised. I had problems with theology and the things that I was being taught, and they didn't make sense, and it didn't line up. And this Jesus I was reading about and what I was being taught didn't connect it. And so what I did was I just was like, well, I'm done. And so I just left. And I decided I filled the void that was with marriage. And then what happens is before I was 21, I had 2 kids. So then it was like, I got 2 human beings I have to take care of now. Okay, got to work. They're going to die. And so I did those things. So the funny thing is when my mom and dad lost their business, one day I had a job and the next day I didn't. But I had no education. I walked into Walmart and I said, I need a job. And the lady said, we're not hiring. I said, I didn't ask if you were hiring. I need a job today. I've got 2 kids. And she looked at me, she was like, okay, fill out this application, go take this drug test, and I'll put you in electronics. And the next day I had a job, and I wasn't there very long, but it kept money coming in. But again, it was kind of what my parents and my family instilled, is always find a solution. There's always a way. There's some way that you can, get out of the space that you're in. So just because of the choices, because of the void in my life, because Jesus wasn't involved heavily into where I was in that space in my 20s, by walking away, become a dependence on alcohol. What happens is when things like that is because there's a void, and we have this void inherently, genetically in us, that we tend to want to put things in place. And the problem with the things that we put in place is they go away. It's a short-term solution. So it's alcohol, it's drugs, it's pornography. The problem is we do it, and for that brief moment, we're like, oh, okay, well, life's better now. Oh, guess what? You went to sleep and you woke up the next day. And you're like, oh, I am in the same spot, the same problem, the same thing. And we sit there and we turn this cycle, and we do it over and over. But then what happens is you look up one day and it's been 10 years, or it's been 13 years. Now, because of situations and things that happened, unfortunately that relationship ended into divorce. But through that tough time in my life, what happened was the realization was, this is not what you were intended for. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. Do you remember when I called you to ministry? Do you remember, this is not the plan. There's a plan. And so through turmoil and through pain and suffering, I was led back. But what was interesting was I wasn't led back on my own. I had no intention to going back to Jesus. And I'm trying not to cry. But who led me back to Jesus was an 11-year-old. And what happens a lot of times is we don't see how God works. We don't notice that God sent somebody to you to go, hey, wake up. Hey, whoa, whoa. No, you're going the wrong way. You're doing the wrong things. You're doing all the stuff. And we don't grab it. We don't grab a hold. And sometimes God will come and literally grab you by the face and go, hey, stupid, you're not doing the right things. Let's go. Like, you're not paying attention. And we're such in that space in our own world that we just miss it. And so I was kind of struggling about what would I talk about and share my testimony. And what came to me was the story of Lot. And I don't know how much you know about Lot, but Lot, Lot is a very kind of short story in the Bible. He's in the beginning of Genesis. But he had an encounter with God when he was in a really bad space. And so I just wanted to kind of share with you, how did God use Lot? How did he change? What happened in that story? And what happens is a lot of times in our past, when we look backwards, we tend to hang on to it. Right? Social media is the worst thing ever, right? So our past can do one of two things. It can forge you into what you're going to become in the future, or it can ultimately destroy you. Those are the two things that happens. So it's what you allow your past to do, the mistakes you do, for your outcome, for how God's going to use you. And some of us, that we hang so tightly onto our past that ultimately it kills you. But it can kill you figuratively, or it can kill you physically. I was raised in a bad home. I had a bad dad, so I do drugs and I die. Oh, wait, but that was your past. That wasn't what God intended for you, right? So you figuratively died. I went through a bad divorce. God, nothing happened. God's not there. I'm not going to do anything. I won't go to church. And you figuratively died. You had no input into the world, right? You had no change. And so God likes to use the worst thing that can happen to you and make it also the greatest story. Amen. So why do we allow for our past to have so much power in our lives? Why do we do that? Well, the reason why is because it's the comfort zone, right? It's the one space that you feel like you had control when you really never did. Because you go back to it, you look at it and you go, oh yeah, remember I got to do that and I got to make that change and I got to, remember that, and it's this false sense of control that you never had. You never did. You don't know what the future is. You don't know what the plan is. If that just happened, that was just a point in your timeline of life. And the problem is we want to go back to it because we like to go back and look how bad life was and wrap ourselves in this warm blanket of our past and go, oh, well, look. And what happens is that becomes the excuse of your life. Well, I can't because, I don't because, well, look what they did. Well, that they did that to me, so I can't do that. I'm not qualified enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not big enough, right? So when we live in our past, we become resistant to the future. And the reason why we become resistant to the future is because the future is the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. So it's easier to go back to the past because I knew what happened. And if I relive that, I always know the outcome. But then all of a sudden when there's this change, what happens if I step out and start a church? What if nobody shows up? What happens if I stop drinking and I'm a divorced dad with 2 boys? What happens if I stop doing that? God, will you bring me any? What happens if I'm single for the rest of my life? What if God does? What if? And the problem is, well, I'll just go back. Why? Because it's easier to drink. It's easier to go backwards. It's easier to sit in that spot and go, well, look what they did to me. And and then you create this false sense of comfort. That's not true. It's built on nothing. So what happens is when we go into that space is it's really about trusting God. We stop trusting God. We stop trusting that God has the best thing for us. We stop relying on him for everything that we're at in our life. And so that's what happened with Lot. Lot lived in a town called Sodom. But the interesting story of how Lot got to Sodom was that Lot was Abram's nephew. Now, Abram becomes Abraham. But there was a family fight over land. Imagine that, families fighting. Shocking. They fought over land, and Abram actually gave Lot the nicer piece of property so they could graze their animals. Interesting thing is, because he was selfish and took the nicer piece, that the kings of the area actually invaded and kidnapped Lot and his family. I am sure in that family discussion that everybody didn't leave the table all on good terms when that all happened. But here's the interesting thing about Abram. Abram found out that Lot and his family had been kidnapped, and he rallied his men, and they went and rescued Lot, saved him, and brought him back. And when he brings them back, Lot says, hey, I'm going to live in this town called Sodom. And Abram was like, okay, it's not a very good place, but if that's where you want to live, cool. And so that's where he landed at. Now, Lot, this place is so bad that God decides to burn everything to the ground. And when I mean everything, including vegetation. So there was not to be anything left. But there was one family that God had decided, hey, that family needs rescued. And it's interesting, the Bible literally uses the word rescued. In 2 Peter 2:7, it says, but God also rescued Lot. Isn't it interesting when we be in a spot in our lives that everything feels like it's going to be burnt down to the ground, and God still wants to rescue you. He still wants to come get you. He rescued Lot out of Sodom because he was a righteous man who was sick of the shameful immorality of the wicked people around him. So Lot knew how bad it was. Lot knew where he lived. He knew of all the bad things that were going on around. And he still decided to stay in that spot. He had free will. He could have moved. He could have left. And to the point that he wouldn't move, that God sent 2 angels to come after him to rescue his family. If you get a chance to read the entire story, it's Genesis 19. And to read the whole story, it'd probably take you about 10 minutes. But there's so much packed into there, all the things that happened. And it really, you'd be like, oh, that was a really bad place to be in. But I'm going to just share today, I'm going to share Genesis 19, 15, and 16. And so God has sent the angels to Lot, to his house. And got to find Genesis, first book in the Bible. It's really hard. Can somebody sing the song? Not saying who that would be. So, Genesis 19:15. At dawn the next morning, the angels became insistent. Hurry, they said to Lot. Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here. Get out right now, or you will be swept away in the destruction of the city. When Lot still hesitated, wait. You're living in the worst city in the land. God has sent 2 angels. 2, not 1, 2. They are standing in your living room and said, yo, we got to go. Like, God's bringing, like, it's going to get bad real quick. And Lot still goes, well, hold up a second. Like, I don't know. How bad is it that you're still living in your past? God brings you to church. God puts people in your lives. God gives you a women's Bible study. God gives you a way to connect. He opens the door. He sends people into your life. And how bad is it that you're continuing to live in that space when you know it's wrong for you to get on your social media and scan back to the company that you got fired from 3 years ago and go, hey, oh, look, yeah, there's so... And God's like, why are you 3 years back? I'm up here. Why are you looking at the old relationship you were in back there? And God's like, wait. I got a new somebody up here. I'll go ahead and go back. I'll be up here waiting. I'm still here. Hadn't left the living room. I'm right here. But why do we do that? Why do we hang so tightly? And it's because it's that false sense of warmth. It's that false blanket that you're wrapping yourself around with. You can't see what God's trying to do. That all God is trying to do is like, hey, just get out of here. I got the rest of it. Verse 16 and 17. The angel seized his hand, the hands of his wife, and the two daughters, rushed them to safety outside of the city, for the Lord was merciful. When they were safely out of the city, one of the angels ordered, "Run for your lives and don't look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains." You have to get out. Get out of your past. Think about how many hands the angels grabbed. It didn't say he grabbed one hand and Dad grabbed their hands. The angels grabbed everybody's hands and they ran away from what was the worst thing in their lives. God led them to that space. You have to get out of your past. You have to stop looking behind. All God wants to do is he wants to deliver you from what's been the worst thing. He wants to grab your hand and take you to the mountains, to take you out of this space. God does not weigh your past against you. His only concern is your future. Why do you think we have Jesus who's on the cross? It's not about what's behind. It's about what's ahead. It's about what you leave at the feet and you step to Jesus and you say, I'm done. Take me where you want me to go. Where do I go? But it's an action. It's a grabbing of the hand. It's running away as fast as you can. Your past has it has the ability to completely destroy you. But it also has ability to help you find what God desires for you to do. It gives you that to look from where you were to where you are now. The other problem we have is if we continually look behind us, you're never going to get to see what the future that God has for you. You'll never get to see how God can bless your life and make a change in your life. The problem is if you're always like this and God's always out there, how are you going to know? Here's what happens when we turn around. When you turn around and you consistently look behind you and you stay in that world, God's going to move on without you. It happened to Lot's wife. Verse 26. But Lot's wife looked back as she was following behind him, and she turned into a pillar of salt. Think about this for a minute. Not just long ago, she was holding the angel's hand. The angel was taking her out of the place that was the worst spot. She stopped. She turned around. And all she had to do was hang on to the hand and continue falling forward. The choice is always yours. God will always give you the opportunity to make. And the choice is whether or not you're going to continue to hang on to his hand or you're going to let go and turn around to your past. For her past was worth more than what Jesus was. So what's behind us doesn't define us. The hand you hold defines you. The hand that you hang on to is your definition. That is your Jesus. That is your King. So why do we have to have a past? Why do we have to have this history that, I don't care what kind of human being you are. We all have something in the background that we're like, not real proud of that one, right? Like, yeah, I shouldn't have went and did that. Yeah. There's always something. I've got some stories. I can tell you. Past Aaron, whew. for God's glory. You're his story. You're his book. 20 years ago, hey, you're going to be on stage preaching to a church. Yeah, no, I'm going to be at the bar. That's really cool. That's where I'm going to be. 20 years ago. But God can't get any glory. If everybody's perfect and all that, God can't say, hey, look at his past. Look where he's at. You think it's me? This whole book is written by people that were not qualified. There's guys that was a terrorist that hunted Christians down and wrote almost the whole New Testament. Like terrorist. Like, so you think some dude up here that like back 20 years ago had a rough patch in his life? The book that you profess that you follow is written by people that are broken, and the reason why is God's glory comes out in that. Right? Because then you're the success story to God. It's real easy to sit there and say words. I could talk here all day about how great God is. And you'd be like, oh, yeah. Oh, let me tell you what God did in my life. He's like, excuse me, you did what? Oh, yeah, my life's not too bad. We don't share our testimony. Somehow, through our lives, telling about how the person we were and where we came from, we don't want to share that because we're afraid that will taint. Somehow that'll affect your image of me. The problem is you're talking about you. You're not talking about your God. So start talking about your God. Stop saying, hey, no. I know where you're at. I've been there. Now, you know what? I've been divorced 3 times. You were 1 time. That's pretty cool. Here's the thing to that. But you know what my God did? Because your focus is on God, you're not concerned about your past. I don't care. I remember Jesus talking to a lady that had 7 husbands. So if you're at 3, you got 4 more to go. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but we look at it as in that moment, in that space, we were so focused on your past. I'm so focused on, oh, you made these mistakes. God won't use me. God can't change me. God can't fix. No. He can, and he will, but you have to hold on to his hand to get changed. And you can't let go. And when you let go, that's when you die. And when you turn around and go, I'm not good enough. I can't. No. Because look where I came from. And that's all he wants to do. I was writing the message, and my wife sent me this text. I'm in my bedroom, and I'm writing it down. And she said, a broken crayon still colors. And I thought, that's really good. But you know what? We're all a bunch of broken crayons in the box. And we're coloring God's book. And it's just it's a color book. You ever see the coloring book and you open up, it's black and white. But then you color and it turns into a picture. And the more you color, the more the picture, the more it reveals and the more it reveals. What do you think we are, people? This is just a coloring book. We're all the broken crayons inside the book. And as we color and as people come in the doors and they walk in, it reveals God. It shows her like, oh, they're broken. They're broken. All these people in here are broken. Crazy how that worked. Oh, but they're all happy. And they love Jesus. And, well, I want to color too. And some of y'all need to color outside the lines. Some of y'all are like way too straight. Like, you need to let the ADD and get a little crazy. Some of us need to have pink hair. It's okay. Yeah. We don't need to worry about going to a wedding and looking good. I mean, yeah, just saying. Some of us need to keep it. If you started it, like, run with it. But I'm just saying, that's another side note. But that's right. Man, what if I get everybody to do pink hair, Ben? Here's what God will do with your shame. Here's what God will do with your brokenness. Isaiah 61:7. Instead of shame and dishonor, you will enjoy a double share of honor. You will possess a double portion of prosperity in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. Amen. Through your past, what God's going to do, if you will hang on to his hand, he will double everything that you thought you had. All the happiness before. There was a time when I thought I had happiness in a liquid. I promise you now today, I have 10 times more happiness than I ever had back then. Right? to see God move. You have to see the angel God sends. For me, it was an 11-year-old angel. That said, come see me get baptized. Come watch. Just watch. And I said, okay. And that angel, that person that God sent, put me back on the path. Because when I'm sitting in the room, it was, do you remember when? Do you remember the calling I had on your life? Yeah, let's get back to that. 15 years of ministry, 10 years with Pastor Jay, all in preparation for today. All in preparation for us to take that next step. So, go color outside the lines. Yeah. God is always in front of you. He's always leading you. He's always there. You just have to turn around. He only has one desire, and that is your future. He does not care about your past. He doesn't care about anything that happened. That's why we have grace, and that's why we have Jesus on the cross. Our sins are covered. You have to make the choice. You have to run away. You have to go to the mountains. You have to go to the hills. He never said, hey, it's going to be super easy. I'm sure running away through, but you don't want to be in the place where the Bible says Abraham went to the hilltop and looked down, and the entire valley looked like a furnace was on fire. And you don't want to be in that space. And God doesn't want you there. He desires to rescue you. He desires to bring somebody to you.